All right. Thanks for that kickoff, Kyle. Really excited to be here. As he said, we're talking about NFTs with superpowers. This is going to be a fun one for everyone. So I'm Ragnar Lifthrasir. I'm the co-founder of Trajan app, Ordinals 2023, and an upcoming Ordinals podcast. I'm joined today with Mark McKenzie. He's the founder of Apollo and the co-founder of Megapont, one of the most loved and recognized NFT collections on Stacks, I would say. And Mark and I are going to answer this question. What does the ultimate NFT look like? And we're going to be talking about 5 things. Number 1 is interoperability. Number 2 is interactivity. Number 3 is security. Number 4 is reputation. And number 5 is fun. So Mark, let's start off with this first one of interoperability. So when I think of interoperability, I think of using NFTs in different applications and across different platforms. So a very simple example is you have an application where you could log in with your wallet and you have your BNS name and you could have a profile pic, but instead of uploading any old image, you can pick an image from your wallet, an NFT, and that's your profile pic. And especially if that's connected to your BNS name. So why would you want to do this? Because it shows you're part of a community. It prevents impersonator accounts because only you own that NFT. Another thing I thought of is registration and proof of participation. So at Ordinals 2023, we gave everyone a free inscription who attended the conference. And we thought about also using that inscription as your registration pass, but the infrastructure isn't there right now for Ordinals. And the last one, and then I'll hand it back over to you, is premium features like Siegel. If you own an NFT, you get some premium features for there. And then gated communities, of course, if you have an NFT, you can be part of a community. So Mark, what are your thoughts on interoperability and what makes a good NFT interoperable?
Hi. So first, thanks for having me here. I'm glad to be part of the panel. I think interoperability is a phrase and a term that a lot of people just don't fully understand. So when I break it down, I usually say it's essentially the usability of the said fungible token in various places. At a basic level, you could think of the Twitter hexagon for Ethereum-based NFTs as some use of interoperability between Twitter and various NFTs. You can assert that somebody with a hexagon PFP on Twitter is actually using an NFT that they truly own. And that's verified by the blockchain and connecting your wallet to Twitter. And then there are advanced use cases. So example of this would be gaming. Everyone always goes back to gaming. So, if I own a gaming asset in one particular game, is that interoperable and usable in another service? Like, can I now use this mythic sword I've achieved by completing some quest in one game on one blockchain and use that in another blockchain? So I think interoperability is inevitable. There are a lot of standards that need to be established for things like gaming assets and making sure there's interoperability with gaming assets. But like at a core level, going on to what you said in a second point, they are a perfect tool for gating access. They are the perfect membership pass in many ways. And some of the earliest use cases for NFTs were, we're going to build a community and we're going to gate access to this community by this NFT. And you will assert ownership of that NFT, and we'll use that to gain you entrance into a clubhouse, into some online portal, into some discount scheme, and the likes. So it's very important, and there are multiple layers. Its basic layer is, where can I use this PFP or this digital collectible? And then there's the more advanced use cases, which are, I think, projects that think of interoperability as a first-class citizen and build from the ground up with it.
Perfect. So in terms of interoperability, there's stacks, then there's ordinal inscriptions. What do you think has greater interoperability? What are some things maybe lacking on stacks and our ordinals to make them more interoperable?
They're pretty close at the moment, I think. And what I'm going at here is essentially, really the interoperability is at the wallet level in many ways. It's where can I use the most wildly supported Web3 wallets in various places. And obviously stacks and ordinals, the 2 leading wallets are Hero and Xverse, which, for those who don't know, started off as stacks wallets first and foremost. So it makes sense that the interoperability and where you can use an NFT with a stacks NFT is closely aligned with an ordinals NFT. And I think where ordinals potentially fall back greatly is in when you want to use interoperability within smart contracts. So that, there are no smart contracts in ordinals. They don't exist. And a use case for that would be something as simple as, hey, I want my NFT project to only be accessible to those who own another project. You can't do that on ordinals. You could with some centralized service, but on Stacks, there's first-class support for that through smart contracts. So there's more interoperability on chain and governed by code within Stacks for sure. But in terms of if I'm a third-party web app building for interoperability with an NFT, gaming or whatever, or access to a web app, then the wallets availed to me are pretty much on parity between ordinals and Stacks.
Great answer. Okay, so let's go on to the second one, which is interactivity. So how can NFTs be interactive? Now, this is a good one when the latest updates in terms of recursive inscriptions. So in terms of both Stacks and inscriptions, what do you think of in terms of NFTs being able to be interactive?
The most popular NFT that we've ever released was something called the Megapont Robot Factory. So it was a free NFT release that followed the meta of the time in 2021. If you owned another NFT, you received this companion NFT for free. And that NFT was fully on-chain, fully interactive. And what you had to do was collect components for your robot. So you would collect like a hat, and you would collect eyes and mouth traits, and you would be able to go into the builder and you'd be able to build the robot that you wanted. So you had your base and then you had your traits. And there are projects that you're seeing doing this now. And people loved that. And anyone you speak to, if you ask them their favorite Megapont shop, they would all say the Robot Factory. We're starting to see more projects do those like builder things. And I think that's a very basic form of interactivity, which is build your own NFT. Obviously, recursive inscriptions or just pointers to other inscriptions enable that really easily, because you could, instead of building the NFT and then inscribing them all, you can reference the traits. So you could do the same thing, exactly the same thing. And this is, you could do this on Ethereum, Solana, and Stacks. Where I'm most excited about interactivity is that next level, which is, okay, I don't specifically want the NFT to hold all of the interactivity. I want it to assert ownership of an asset that has interactivity enabled. And I think we got so caught up with trying to put everything on chain and cram everything into smart contracts that we realized that actually what we truly want on chain is the ownership and the marketing layer and the marketability and being able to transfer and sell. We don't want absolutely everything on chain. We just want certain aspects of that. So we're starting to see more projects adopt this idea, which is, okay, I just want to assert that, Ragnar and Mark own these assets. I don't want all of the interactivity to be on them.
Thanks, Mark. That's a perfect segue into our third factor, which is security. And you kind of brought that up in terms of ownerships. So when I think of NFTs and security, I first think of provenance, right? And provenance is the place of origin, the history of the ownership of an object, especially when it's documented or verified or authenticated. So this is a big deal in NFTs. But there's a unique thing that we can do now with Stacks and ordinals going from layer 2 to layer 1. And the guys at Dots, Hank and Jeff, came up with this really cool tool where you can take a file, a PNG, you could sign it with your BNS name, and then you had this signed file. And you could take that file and then you could inscribe it. And anyone can verify that file was signed by your BNS address. Anyone can take that inscription and verify it was signed by your BNS address. So this helps to prove provenance of an inscription, and you can do so many cool things besides art with this. So when you think of security, what do you think of in terms of NFTs?
I think it's a multifaceted question for sure. Ultimately, I always go back to the basic, which is, to me, the security of the blockchain means that we've got full, like you said, full provenance and full history of who created this NFT, where this NFT has been, who owns this NFT. And it's really the first time ever in humanity that we've had this, globally distributed, accessible database to anyone where, it's immutable. Nobody, yet has control or can change the state. And you can see exactly where an asset has been and who owns that asset. It can't be faked. You can, make attempts at counterfeiting those. The typical example of that is a fake NFT, right? Anyone right now can create Bored Ape Yacht Club and sell 10,000 NFTs that look exactly the same. but we know the original collection because we know, and people say to me, how do you know that that's the original collection? The easiest way to break that down is essentially we know Yuga Labs is public key. So we know that that's the original collection because they've wildly publicized and they've wildly make publicly available their public key. So we know that anything coming from that public key at that time was the original collection. So I can't just go and launch the new collection because people would rightfully be able to say, this isn't your public key, this isn't the original collection. And that's really important. But moving forward, the security element, and going off on a bit of tangent here, one thing that I think isn't solved yet is the custody part. There are a lot of people, myself included, who are very hot to shut down anyone's attempt at sort of these sort of third-party custody solutions. But I do think that's super important moving forward, because if you want to onboard, the masses to NFTs and the blockchain as a whole, in many ways, we're going to need to make it completely invisible. And we're going to need to sell the technology as the solution and make the blockchain invisible. A good example would be someone like Reddit, who onboarded millions of people to NFTs and they had no idea. They were just completely transient there in the background. No one knew they existed.
Good answer. And just to stay on that for just a minute before we go to reputation and talking about security, I think this will become more important. I'm like you, Mark, I'm very anti-custody, but there are sometimes reasons for that, and we should have tools for that. And I'm thinking right now, as NFTs become more valuable, you want better security. And even like Liquidium, they're speaking, I think, a little bit later today. Great team over there. But if you're going to be using an NFT as collateral, and especially if you're a company or an institution, you better have good security for those assets. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of thinking of NFTs, custody as just a dollar value and protecting?
It's very difficult. And again, there are multiple ways to break down this problem. The first and foremost, a good example of this is, in many cases, art galleries do not want to display NFTs. And people are thinking that, why are there not Bored Apes and CryptoPunks in art galleries? It's not always because they don't agree with the art and they think they look terrible, because culturally, you can't deny that those two collections specifically have had significant cultural impact. But art galleries just can't get insurance to display them in some instances, because they've either not dealt with these before, or the insurance side of things is just too difficult for them to deal with. Ultimately, someone in the gallery somewhere is going to have keys for an NFT. And that just spooks them out in some instances. And there are private custody solutions who deal with this for some of the bigger art galleries and some of the bigger collections, but they're not mainstream solutions. And ultimately, people have said to me, why do you use centralized exchanges so much? So for someone who's very strong about, keep your coins within your custody, I use centralized exchanges for almost all of my businesses that deal with the blockchain, because ultimately, if something goes wrong, say I'm in a fatal accident, then there's a clear legal pathway for whoever takes over a company to gain access to those funds. And that's through social verification. So whether that's, using Gemini, Binance, or Coinbase, that social verification, that layer that exists, companies such as Ryder are trying to address this as well, the social recovery, which is really important. That's a real problem. I've got my private key separated into multiple places between safety deposit boxes and safes. I'm not sure my partner would have any idea what to do, even if she recovered them. And that's a real problem for the next phase as well. So we need to solve that. But then on the flip side, there's a real protocol risk for using various protocols like Liquidium or Paraspace or any of this sort of NFT lending. And when we say protocols at risk, what do we mean by that? Well, there's never zero risk in using any smart contract, regardless of whether it's an NFT project or whether it's DeFi, whatever it is. The potential for exploits are real, and there's some inherent protocol risk. And I would always say that anyone playing with NFT finance should do so in the knowledge that this is a really early technology, and it's very high risk from a protocol side of things. So if you're using BendDAO, Liquidium, or anything else, just be very careful with the funds that you're putting in there, because there's some inherent risk, whether that means the asset gets locked forever or it just takes a while to be drawn down, or there's some protocol risk that breaks the amount of yield that you're receiving, or that the amount that someone needs to repay, because these are early technologies. So just be very careful when you're playing with those early emerging crypto technologies.
Absolutely. And we have to remember that NFT is ultimately a crypto asset. I know value is subjective, art is subjective, but it still has value. You never know what's going to happen in the market. So those are good things. So I think it's common sense. Just use your typical Bitcoin good practices when it comes to security. Let's go to the next one. This is kind of a different one, which is reputation, using NFTs and reputation. And this is something that I'm very passionate about. Trajan.app is my startup, and we use non-transferable NFTs to help with identity. And putting this into context is the pseudonymous economy. So as we know, the pseudonymous economy is the future. As the world kind of turns a little bit more tyrannical, more and more people have to use pseudonyms. It's no longer a choice for a lot of people in a lot of countries. And so how do we help the pseudonymous economy? And especially now with Bitcoin finally being a blockchain for building, there's a whole crop of new builders, and they might be coming from a different chain or whatever, but they now want to use a pseudonym to get involved in this. But it's so hard to build identity when you're pseudonymous. So what we do at Trajan is you can endorse someone for a specific skill or a specific fact or their identity or anything, and then that's text and an image, and that becomes an NFT that is non-transferable, and that's tied to their BNS, the BNS name, which is also an NFT, right? And so we have this great way on Stacks to use NFTs for reputation. And another way to think of reputation is maybe as an artist. Mark, you've done a lot of projects now, and part of your reputation is based on the work of your NFT projects, right? So for you, when you think of reputation and NFTs, what do you think of?
Mm-hmm. So taking those two, I think it's 2 points out, taking them separately, the anonymity of the space as well. You need to really think, okay, who am I trying to, protect my privacy from? If you're trying to protect your sort of your core social presence, you don't want everyone on Twitter to know that this is your wallet. There are a very different set of practices and processes that you need to undertake versus, say, protecting your wallet address from a local government. Like, they're very different. Like, one of them means you can't touch a centralized exchange, and the other one means you can just send everything to Coinbase, and you just need to be careful with what you're tying to your BNS name or your ENS name. So you need to take a pragmatic approach. Protecting yourself from almost everyone involved, whilst possible, is very, very difficult to do, and you need to be somewhat diligent and militant even in how you conduct yourself online, especially with moving funds, because, like I said, it's an immutable blockchain, and everything from where it goes and where it's going to is traceable. So you can't just send it to one of your other wallets and expect it to remain anonymous and private. So you need to be very careful, and also just be pragmatic. Who are you protecting yourself from, and try to get a set of processes in place there. And on the reputation side of things, it's closely linked, because ultimately, maybe I'm happy for Ragnar to endorse me for art because Ragnar knows who I am, but that doesn't mean that Jane Doe knows who I am. So you can build these networks like Trajan, which is, okay, maybe I could, even in person. So I'm now not using my pseudonym, but in person, I've met a whole bunch of people who know my accomplishments, who know the projects I've been running, and they're happy to endorse me on this app where I have anonymity and I have this pseudonym. Because they have that social sort of consensus that, okay, we've met this person, we know who this person is. They worked at Google, so we're going to endorse them for data science because we had a data science there or whatever. So again, it's just been pragmatic and understanding that if you want to be completely private online and completely anonymous, there's a cost to pay, and it's very difficult to do so. And a better approach is to really just say, okay, who am I willing to disclose some of my identity to, and who do I want to remain private from? That's very different, again, if you're living in a sort of an oppressed state as well, right? Like there's a sort of a different set of rules that you need to follow versus someone just trying to minimize their exposure to their local government.
Great thoughts, Mark. I think the same exact thing. Very good context. So we have a minute and a half left. We have the last question. What makes NFTs fun? For me, what's a fun NFT is the one that I create, the one I inscribe. And I have lots of NFTs that I'm never going to sell or share. So Mark, last question. What makes NFTs fun?
An NFT to me is fun when you just can't wait to share it with someone, right? Whether that's like a spouse or a friend or even someone online. The ones that you're just eager to share, and you don't want to sell them. I think everyone has a price, obviously, but you don't want to sell them because they just, they have some emotional attachment. The best way to put it is sentimental. So if an NFT has any kind of sentimental value, I think you're more likely to keep it, especially gifted NFTs. Gifted NFTs was a joke at one point, but it is a really good way to just send various things to people that are quite cool. Like I've sent a bunch of crypto kitties to people who I know, like cats, and they're like, "Oh, this is like really cool. Like it's fun. It's not necessarily worth a whole bunch of money, but it's really fun." Everyone associates fun with gaming. It doesn't have to be some sort of gaming application or a gaming NFT for it to be fun. The fun might live within the community, it might live within some utility, or it might just live within the art or the NFT itself. It might look really quirky and janky and you just vibe with it. So just something that makes you smile, really. Smile and want to share it with someone, and then you've got yourself a fun NFT project.
Well, thank you, Mark. This was a fun time, and we'll send it back over now to Kyle for the next one.